Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy today to introduce Dr. Marco Faini, who is Marie Curie researcher between Toronto, Canada, and Venice, Italy, at Ca' Foscari University, and who is conducting a research project on doubt in Italian Renaissance. And today the talk is very much related to his research project. We will proceed in this way. The talk will take between 20-25 minutes, and then we have plenty of time for discussion, question answer session, and commenting this very nice event that will be recorded. I say to everybody because we need to, of course, to be aware of this and to agree with this, so that it will be also shared on social networks, etc., for people who cannot attend today. So Marco, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing your knowledge and your research results. And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Teodoro. Thank you for inviting me. It's really good to see you again, to see some friends connected and ready to talk with me about my project. That's really great. So I will start. If we have issues with the PowerPoint, or if just let me know. And okay, let's talk. And when we talk of doubt, of early modern doubt, I guess that it's really hard not to think of Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. The work, as we know, describes doubt as a quintessentially solipsistic experience, a sort of mental experiment carried out in the secret of one's chamber. The opening gesture of the meditation is in fact one of retirement. And I quote, "I have withdrawn into seclusion," end of quote. So from within the boundaries of his seclusion, Descartes will accomplish his purpose, and I quote, "to attack the very principles that form the basis of my former beliefs," end of quote, so that the whole structure of knowledge can be utterly demolished. And these are Descartes' words. So Descartes' exercise leads him to his famous and uncanny hypothesis that, and I quote, "some evil spirit, supremely powerful and cunning, has devoted all his efforts to deceiving me," end of quote. Because of this evil spirit, quoting again, "there is nothing of which it is not legitimate to doubt," end of quote. And in fact, as we probably know, I'm oversimplifying, I know, but this preliminary moment of hyperbolic doubt leads to the construction of Descartes' new epistemology and to a new metaphysics. In this talk today, I would like to argue that in 16th century Italy, doubt was not necessarily the solitary and distressing experience described by Descartes. In fact, in the central decades of the century, we can find forms of sociability revolving around doubt. Sometimes this sociability was real, sometimes it was just fictional. In all cases, however, it pointed to gatherings of men and women who met to discuss doubts and curiosities and questions. The third doubt is certainly ambiguous, for it can be a synonym of curiosity, question, but also point to more radical ways of questioning official narratives. Sometimes these questions, these meanings are conflated, and seemingly innocent curiosities can usher in more serious questions. In all the cases that I will discuss today, however, doubt is the object of works in the vernacular that address a potentially large readership, and this is, I guess, an important point. None of the works I will be talking about today is technically a philosophical treatise. None of these works requires a humanistic background. In one case, as we will see, doubt emerges from a divination game, a game of chance designed to entertain men and women with questions on everyday matters. So in no case we are faced with this kind of struggle that Descartes experienced against the sort of the fleeting glimpses of an enigmatic and possibly delusional reality. So around 1550, a gentleman from Brescia, and I guess we can start the proper slideshow. So this gentleman from Brescia, Count Fortunato Martinengo, we see a beautiful painting portrait by Moretto da Brescia. So this man founded an academy which he called the Dubbiosi, of the doubtful. The academy was short-lived, as was Martinengo himself. He died 2 years later, and the academy died with him. Martinengo was born into one of the most prominent feudal families in all the Venetian Republic, and one of the most steadily involved in religious dissent. One of his brothers fled Italy, for he was a Calvinist. He left. He was an exile, religionis causa. Martinengo himself was deeply engaged in the religious discussions of his time. And this portrait by Moretto reveals a good deal of Martinengo's psychology. Despite this very rich, opulent setting, the antiques displayed on the table, you see the coins and all the objects, we see this kind of melancholic attitude that Martinengo has, stressed by this gesture of resting the cheek on the palm of his hand, the typical gesture of melancholy. Scholars have hypothesized that Martinengo was mourning the loss of his wife, Livia d'Arco, at this time. But nevertheless, his poems, he wrote a few poems, reveal much of the same melancholic attitude. The Accademia dei Dubbiosi gathered intellectuals active in Padua and Venice, although it had strong ties with the Kingdom of Naples, so it spanned throughout Italy. Only 2 works can be connected to the Academy with certainty. And you have the frontispieces. Of particular interest is the first, the lettura, literally a reading of a sonnet of a sonnet in praise of the Marchioness of Vasto, Maria d'Aragona. The work is by the polygrapher Gerolamo Ruscelli. The work aims to prove women's perfection while also explaining the Platonic ladder for ascending from earthly love to spiritual contemplation. The work is simply an exercise in Neoplatonic philosophy, yet its opening declares that it will deal with the, and I quote, high and above any other most important doubt concerning the crooked nature of mankind. We know that the academicians discussed about love, about Petrarch's poetry, and about the querelle des femmes. Whether they took their discussions to a deeper level, addressing more pressing religious issues, as the inclinations of some of them could suggest, remains unfortunately unknown to us. It is sure, though, that Martinengo's intellectual background was rooted in a culture wherein doubt played a central role, as testified to by the works by his friends Sperone Speroni and Daniele Barbaro. And maybe Teodoro Academies will tell us something about this later. Fortunato Martinengo's relationships included also a long-lasting friendship with Ortensio Lando, a master of mid-500 doubt and an intriguing and utterly elusive figure. Lando is best known today for his paradoxes. Paradoxes are, broadly speaking, part of the culture of doubt, as they present alternative ways to look at reality, suggesting that opposite interpretations of the same phenomenon are always possible. Martinengo features in many of Lando's works, as do many of the people gravitating around Martinengo and the Dubbiosi. For this reason, it is probably not too far-fetched to consider 2 of Lando's works as virtual academies ideally complementing the real Academy of the Doubtful. The first is the Lettere di molte valorose donne, letters by many valorous women, and the second is known as 4 Books of Doubt, Quattro Libri di Dubbi. Scholars are divided, I will focus first on the Lettere. Scholars are divided as to the real authorship of these letters, which are exchanged by 181 women of generally, but not exclusively, high social standing. Although the most plausible hypothesis is that the letters are Lando's invention, he may have drawn on original material. While the historical identity of many of the women involved in these literary exchanges is beyond dispute, that of the others is less sure. So we don't know if some of these women were real or just Lando's invention. Lando seems here to endorse conflicting ideas, resorting to his style based on doubt and paradox to cover the traces of his real beliefs. Meredith Ray, building on Paul Grandler's intuition, has stressed that Lando's insistence on arguing in the text from both sides of the same issue serves a double purpose: to ridicule humanistic rhetoric and eventually, and I quote, to cast doubt on the importance of the question, end of quote. Lando capitalized on the growing importance of the querelle de femme, on the role that women were assuming in reform circles, and on the appetite of the market for collections of letters. Now, Lando's collection of letters revolves around real, partially real or imagined networks of women, which often coincide with Lando's own networks. The exhibition of sociability is key in Lando's works. It serves as a means to seek and reinforce protection, but it can serve also as a call to arms to people who share Lando's ideas of spiritual renewal. Even if most letters are not followed by an answer, they are nevertheless parts of an ongoing dialogue. And the result is that a sort of kaleidoscopic conversation touching upon doubts in several matters, from love to married life, from art to religion, from the superiority of women and erudition. For example, Ottavia Baiarga, who was a real person and she was born into a noble family from Parma in 1524, writes a letter to Camilla Testa, who was a learned woman from Rome, asking, and I quote, for the solution of some doubts that the other day were discussed in my house by ingenious women, end of quote. More than the content of this 20-something doubts, all pertaining to love, it is important to note the stress in this form of sociability, a sort of domestic academy where ingenious women convene to discuss doubts. Now, Ottavia's doubts actually are not original. They're not Ottavia's. She, Ottavia, or possibly Lando on her behalf, was drawing these doubts from a lost work, the so-called Aura by Giovan Giacomo Calandra, who was known to 16th century readers and to us, by the way, through Mario Equicola's Libro de Natura de Amore, so the book on the nature of love, in which Equicola had made a sort of summary of the love doubts discussed in this book. So apparently Lando is building on the courtly tradition of love doubts. Love doubts were a favored game in courtly culture. And yet Camilla's answer focused on the sexual connotations of love and on a sort of caricatural self-description. Camilla is old and she describes her body and, you know, in a very caricatural way, seems to debase precisely that tradition of courtly love. And that leaves us with the, you know, the doubt actually of what are we actually reading in this text. Another example includes letters that sit at the intersection of what we may call ancient history or erudition and religious history. A nice example is a letter written by Emilia d'Arco, so probably a relative of Martinengo's wife, to Costanza Borella. Again, a letter that suggests an ongoing discussion, sort of habit of discussing doubts and questions, and I should have the text. So the other day, I'm not reading the Italian text, but you can read it if you like. So the other day, and that alludes to these ongoing discussions, I begged of you that you send me the solution to the following doubts. And then it goes on. And basically, this doubt concerns some inconsistencies in Roman religion, in ancient Roman religion, and in Roman rites. So this could be just a sort of erudite curiosity. But if we look closely at this letter, we can see that it's more problematic than it seems. It seems that more than this sort of antiquarian and philological preoccupation with the past, we can see the sort of above mentioned parody of erudition. Besides, again, these doubts seem to mock Roman ceremonies and their inconsistencies, listing conflicting and seemingly unreasonable practices. For anyone acquainted with Lando's views on religion, this irony projected back onto the ancient religion of the Romans, actually takes on a new meaning, and it suggests some criticism of the Roman Catholic Church. But again, we have to read, between the lines. However, doubts in the Valorose Donne were not confined to this form of learned entertainment. At the opening of the collection, for example, we find a letter by Isabella d'Este Gonzaga, the Marchioness of Mantua, to a Jewish woman also from Mantua, known as Pazienza Pontremoli. And again, I have the text. I'm not going to read the whole text, but Isabella would like Pazienza to convert. And whether this is a real document or an attempt on Landa's part to represent the scruples and the state of mind of a person considering conversion, it depicts a condition of doubt and distress. Dall'altro canto, stammi dubbiosa. On the other hand, I remain doubtful that, and so on and so forth. And the letter is a bold statement. Isabella doesn't want, Pazienza doesn't want to convert, actually. But then she concludes on a different note to say, while I wait for the Spirit to reveal me what am I to do, pray for me. So a sort of suspension of action, waiting for a revelation from God, In other cases, again, doubt emerges as the inevitable result of the philosopher's vain speculations in the context of evangelical invitations to leave aside all worldly knowledge and focus exclusively on the Bible. Giovanna Cavalleria, writing from Venice to Clara Gualanda, shows that her praise of the Bible is at the same time a devaluation of all disciplines. In this letter, doubt appears as one of the most fearful consequences of humanity's vain pursuit of knowledge, and I quote, does it, meaning the Bible, perchance make you unbelieving and doubtful of immortality like philosophers do? Neither does it offer the vain knowledge of doctors, mathematicians, students of law, historians. Now, these are just samples of the many letters dealing with doubt on different levels in this collection of letters. Whatever we make of Landa's fiction, we cannot but notice the importance that it gives to a form of sociability revolving around doubt. And it's really important to notice that doubt is not necessarily, a form of skepticism. Instead, doubt serves several functions, denoting curiosity towards love or methods of erudition, the state of mind of those who are facing dramatic personal choices, such as conversion, and of course, the oblique attack on official narratives and on official knowledge. A few years later, in 1552, and then again in 1556, Lando published his 4 books of doubts. The complete edition is the 1556 one. In this edition, the 1556 one, the printer Giolito addresses the reader with a short letter in which he claims that the 4 books are a sort of spiritual journey, moving from love and sensuous things to arrive, and I quote, to the contemplation of higher and divine things, end of quote. It is the same trajectory followed by Ruscelli's Lettura, but in the case of Landa's work, the philosophical content is more apparent than real. Certainly the answers to the doubts contain, and I quote, most great secrets and most beautiful advices, end of quote. But these are meant, and I quote again, to make a man seem wise and prudent despite his not being an expert in the studies of philosophy or theology, end of quote. So the ideal reader of this work is less interested in achieving inner wisdom or solid knowledge than in finding a shortcut to brilliant social conversation. In fact, things are more complicated than Giolito believed or wanted us to believe. For a start, Lando is cleverly using a new and catchy title, Books of Doubts, for a work rooted in an old genre, the so-called books of problems or books of questions. He is the first one to use doubts instead of questions or problems on the frontispiece. And of course, the word doubt contains layers of intriguing intricacy that competing words do not possess. The Book of Problems genre traditionally goes back to the pseudo-Aristotelian tradition of the Problemata and the Secreta Secretorum. So the contents usually of these books usually consider medical and scientific matters, traditionally overlooked in lofty treatises. Land extended the realm of problems covered by these works to ethics and religion. A gifted writer, Land introduced some novelties in the genre. First of all, the fiction connected to what I call a virtual academy. Now, books of questions or books of problems traditionally contain questions and answers, but what Land does is that he moves away from this sort of disembodied pattern of answers and questions, and he introduces hundreds of well, dozens of characters with a name, with a social rank, who ask questions to the author. The author is Lando. He takes part in the text. He answers to these questions. He says, I. So we have this impression of an ongoing discussion of a sort of virtual assembly of men and women asking curiosity and doubts and questions. Lando creates a labyrinth where different characters, often ask the same question, and this is interesting, but receive different, if not opposite, answers. In doing so, Lando plays with a corpus of received knowledge, showing its contradictions and its weaknesses. Second, is presenting the reader with a sort of mise en abîme of his work. In a work of doubts, the reader is often in a situation of doubt, unable to choose among two equivalent options. We have equivalent explanations, but opposite, equivalent but opposite of the same thing. So what are we to make of them? And there is one more strategy at work in Lando's Dubbi that becomes most effective in the last book, when Lando advances his heterodox religious ideas. Now, in this case, multiplying different and conflicting answers discourages the potential censor, while the reader patient enough to follow Lando's rhetorical strategies will learn to discover the author's authentic convictions. Lando's successful formula mediated the access to sometimes intricate doctrines, natural, philosophical, and religious, by a vast public of curious men and women. Readers could identify with a crowd of curious doubters and interlocutors featured in his work, who asked doubts and questions that may have crossed the reader's own minds. The more attentive among these readers may have seen beyond the maze of dead alleys created by Lando his real purposes, from the deconstruction of humanist culture to the suggestions concerning radical religious ideas. All must have probably been under the impression of taking part in some academic gathering, sitting among the public of a virtual assembly of doubters. If the speakers of Lando's works belong to the elites, they usually do, his readers could potentially come from all social classes, provided that they had some education, some degree of literacy. Democratizing a quintessentially elitist institution such as an academy was probably a byproduct of Lando's strategy that transformed doubt, even when potentially disruptive, and some of the doubts discussed in the work are in fact disruptive, into a social game. And I come to my final example, into a real game. Francesco Marcolini's Sorti, or his Giardino di Pensiero, Garden of Thoughts, which is a beautiful, beautiful title. This work was published in 1540 and republished in 1550. And it's a game of, a divination game, gioco, un libro di sorti, or libro di ventura, as they were called, these kind of games. This game allowed players to cast dice, to use cards, and they took delight in the different paths of fortune, and they had this illusion of controlling fortune. But also the thrill of being exposed, to the inconstancy of fortune and destiny itself. And this particular book, which is a masterpiece of the genre, contained a series of images matched with short poems written by Ludovico Dolce, and these poems were the answers to a set of questions, or a series of questions asked by players. And as you can see, the Sorti displays this beautiful, lavish frontispiece showing philosophers and astronomers disputing. There are some ruins in the background. In the foreground, we see a young man, again in this melancholic attitude, the one we saw in the painting by Moretto, and this smiling young woman who is keeping a book open for this young man to see. The book is the sword itself, and this woman is inviting the young man to play. We can see also a deck of cards in the foreground. And therefore, the author of this engraving, Giuseppe Potti, is sort of breaking the barrier between the book and the reader or the beholder of this image. We are invited to look into the image and to take part in the game that this young woman and this young man are just about to play. Now, games of chance are based on a series of crosses. This one is very complicated. I'm not sure I understood how it works. There are 1 or 2 pages of explanations. I've never been really good at this kind of games. I'm kind of dumb. But it's basically based on, like I said, on dice and cards. And you had to make your way through a sort of labyrinth of possible ways, of possible paths. And the idea behind this particular game, was that from the same point one can reach different answers, but the same answers can apply to different questions. So again, it's more or less the idea of Lando, and I guess this is a very Renaissance idea, and the same. Probably we find it in Machiavelli or in Ariosto. The same path can lead to opposite conclusions. As a scholar, Christian Rivoletti put it, and I quote, 2 or more different paths have the same outcome, and the work shows that conversely, 2 or more similar paths can bring to just as many different outcomes. So we can say that doubt is brought directly into the structure of the work. Its very essence. The etymology of the word doubt was actually in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance connected with the idea of crossroads. So in this work, you are all the time you are at a crossroads and you have to make a choice, or the cards make this choice for you. But on a more exterior level, doubt is also ubiquitous in the responses to the questions asked by players, as we will see. So this book contains a series of 50 allegorical images of virtues and vices, and 50 images of ancient philosophers. Each allegory is displayed, let me show you, is displayed. So we have, in this case, peccato, sin, is displayed on a page associated with 4 moral categories or quadri shown on the facing page and divided by a cross. This is the page of doubt. And you see, we have doubt, dolcezza, sweetness, experience, and belief. In this work, you can reach the quadro of doubt only from the allegory of fear, timore. And that's interesting because doubt was associated in the game with sin and fear. And if you look at the allegory of sin, well, I'm sorry, the quality is really bad, but it's an old man who's trying to reach for a woman, for a woman's genitalia, as if doubt was somehow connected with a form of violation. Now, if so, doubt could be identified, as is often the case in the mid-16th century, with an excessive will of knowledge, a sort of violation of the boundaries set to our understanding. Sartre displays, in fact, a pessimistic view of existence, in which appearance and reality only rarely and totally randomly coincide. There seems to be no divine or providential plan guiding our actions, and if there is one, it remains unfathomable to us. Things are not as they seem, and neither are people, while faith and justice seem to have abandoned this earth, and peace lies in a remote and most uncertain future. Doubt is not only an intellectual practice, but a pragmatic habit of self-defense against the blows of fortune and the delusional nature of reality, as many of the responses suggest. And I will read a few of these responses. For example, those attributed to Anaxarchus, implausible as the first is, of course. This is a game, right? So I like that Margutte's creed, which was useful and healthy. And oftentimes it is a great virtue not to believe to others. I'm sorry, I left only the Italian text, but in non credere ad altri è gran virtute. It's really a great virtue not to believe. And another one reads, belief, my son, is oftentimes harmful. If you want to live safely, do not believe in anything, non credere nulla. I tell you this, shouting it out loud. Two further answers attributed respectively to Eurylochus and to Anaximander explicitly lay out a program of radical doubt wherein incredulity becomes a form of self-defense against the pitfalls of existence. And I'm gonna read again, I left only the Italian text, but I'll read my translation. Even if someone swears on the sacred God, be always doubtful and live cautiously. And in this way, you shall never be fooled. To trust people was always judged dangerous. And if you love me, be always incredulous and doubtful, mostrati sempre dubbioso, dubita sempre. This is a sort of obsessive refrain throughout the work. Now, you must imagine that most of these questions actually revolve around, will I ever get married? Will I be happy in life? This kind of sort of questions. But taken as a sort of sequence of poems, they go on and on repeating this refrain, doubt, don't believe, be skeptical, be doubtful. The second edition of, the first edition of this work came actually out a couple of years before the reestablishment of the Roman Inquisitions. It's a sign of the times that were changing, whereas the second edition came out in 1550 in a time of inquisitorial trials, when the Inquisition was really dismantling all the networks of, well, now we call them heretics at the time, people who had different views concerning the renewal of the church, for example. And I really come to my conclusion. Now, these examples show that doubt in Italy in the 1540s and in the 1550s was no longer an experience limited to professional philosophers. Nor was it exclusively an individual condition of unrest, of anxiety. Doubt could be shared with one's peers and multiplied through the printing press. Its ambiguous and polysemic nature made it the ideal instrument to express a wide range of ideas and feelings, and of doing it in a sort of secret, safe way, but also an attractive and engaging way. One could literally play with doubt, and the existence of different forms of social aggregation suggests that despite Italy never had a Montaigne or a Descartes, it had nonetheless a vibrant and fascinating culture of doubt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. That was a great talk. Thank you. I do have some questions actually, and some comments, but I first would like to listen to others. If you have, we officially open the discussion session. So who wants to intervene, to ask? Marco is here for also for our interest in even in different directions. Ruben, please.
Yes, thank you, Marco. That was really interesting. I have just probably a silly question that arose when you were saying about doubt as a self-defense mechanism. And I was just wondering if the fact that doubt became this sort of self-defense mechanism could be somehow related to, I would say, the information overload that was characterizing that period of, well, so many books printed, so many much more knowledge available to everyone. I don't know if there was really the feeling that with this bombarding of information from everywhere, that was seen as a necessity in a way to filter what was coming from books, for instance, also on a broad scale.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ruben. Good to see you. No, that's a really good question. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Brandon Dooley, I don't know if you are familiar with that book called The Social History of Skepticism, which is more about 17th century culture, but he has a chapter precisely on that, you know, doubt as a consequence of, in a way, probably also a form of self-defense against the overload of information. Now, in the 17th century, that is definitely an issue, but there are traces of a kind of dawning conscience that information can be actually manipulated, and it can be unreliable already in the 16th century. There are sources telling us that, in fact, people began to realize that there was too much information going around, and that information could be, in fact, false, or at least somehow manipulated to political purposes. There is a beautiful poem by Mattia Francesi, a capitolo sulle nuove, a chapter on the news, literally complaining about a number of news going around on the Rialto, and people printing and circulating news that were actually fake news. In fact, he says, you know, these people are selling news and don't even know what they're selling, because it's all false, you know. And so there is this idea that, yes, we have too much information and we don't know what's going on. But even before, I recently came across a diary by a notary in Como. So at the end, immediately after the invasion of the French in 1494, in which he writes, it gives, you know, it accounts for some of the explanations going around about what was going on. You know, the Duke of Milan was behind this, and then he says, well, there's so much information going around about this, and I have no idea, and actually no one knows what's going on. So I shall stop here, because we are all doubting. I guess he uses precisely that word. We are all doubting about what's going on, so we don't know. It's better to stop than to give credit to these ideas going on. So yes, in a nutshell, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, you had a question?
Going further on Ruben's question, but it's perhaps a bit broad. This concept of doubt, do you know, well, when it started is perhaps a bad question, but is this really a 16th century thing, or is it going on earlier, or I don't know?
Okay.
Farther.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. No, actually, it's not an exclusively, of course, 16th century thing, but what I tried to do in this project, and what I'm trying to do is actually to study precise moment in Italian history, a moment that more or less, but not necessarily, more or less begin at the end of the 15th century and ends with the Council of Trent, more or less. Because I believe that that particular period is in a way unique, at least in Italian history, because of the amount of incredible events that take place. The loss of freedom, the French invasion, the end of, in a way, of a political order, of a religious order, encounters with new people, new words, the sack of Rome, the overload of information. There's really so much going on, but you can actually see in sources a sort of surge of discourses on doubt. So while we have a lot of people voicing doubts before and after, while we have philosophers building systems based on doubt before and after, what is really peculiar, specific to that period, is that we found discourses on doubt in sources that usually, well, you do not expect them. Poems, in visual sources, in novellas, there is a lot of reflection on what doubt is. And this is not just philosophers, this is not just theologians, it's poets, writers, people, like Lando, people addressing, a really large readership. And the idea is that in these decades in Italy, we see a series of discourses on doubt. What is doubt? Even, people trying to imagine how doubt looks like. If you were to paint doubt, for example, Michelangelo is one of the first who does it. At the end of the 16th century, we have, of course, Ripa in his iconology. But even before, it's in the 1530s. So it all points to a widespread sense of uncertainty, which is not just personal, internal anxiety, but it's more like a sense of puzzlement. This world is so rapidly changing that these people actually not only have doubts, but also wondering, well, maybe doubt is something that we can turn into a tool or a weapon in a way, instead of just, having doubts about whether the soul is immortal or not. What can we make of doubt? Can we use it to, carve a space for ourselves in reality? Can we, or maybe not, or, so that's probably specific to my period. This.
I was actually thinking the same thing. I mean, if we think of the second half of the 16th century, where the activity of polygraphs and all the book market is expanding dramatically, I was wondering if this type of literature will proliferate or not. Indeed, I mean, because I see that even also the second part of the century is very, very it really gives the ground for a further expansion in this direction of doubting, of the increasing of amount of news and the risk of fake news. And so I was actually wondering, likewise, Liz, if the future of the period that you are studying, it's also very, very much related or connected to this activity. But of course, I mean, I don't. Of course, your project is focused on the first half of the Renaissance, and I wonder this also because we are in the period of, I mean, at least at this, we are half century, all the mechanism of counter-reformation working to establish something against doubt, actually. So I was also wondering if at the half of the century it also becomes a way to one of the way in which heresy works, or is this literature attacked officially and massively by the church because of the acting of doubting?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is specific, like from the Inquisition, there's specific actions against, even if it's just a, in the form of doubting is just in the form of joke, is not a serious, real philosophy, but it might be. Is it seen as a dangerous activity, even in the form of a joke, of a game?
Yeah, thank you, Teodoro. Let me start from the end of your questions. I actually was intrigued when I began working on this project. I was actually really intrigued by the idea of founding an Academy of the Doubtful, Academies in 1550. It's really the last thing you wanted to do at that particular time. Call yourself dubioso, right? Because doubt was, of course, connected, to say the least, to Erasmus. And you don't want to be, a fan of Erasmus at that particular moment. Particularly if you had a brother who had just left Italy, you know, for he was a Calvinist, not if your best buddy had been tried twice by the Inquisition, you know, calling yourself that was not a really smart move, probably. So yes, calling yourself doubtful was dangerous. Silvana Seidel-Menke, in her book on Erasmus, has a chapter on doubt that shows that even in the 1580s, 1590s, people had in a way understood that they could use doubt as a form of self-defense, you know. So when someone by the Inquisition said, I didn't say that, but it was more a doubt, you know, I was just voicing a doubt, but of course it wasn't. People were very well aware that could voice, you know, prohibited ideas in the form of doubt. So, yeah. And therefore, I assume that Inquisition knew this as well. So they were very, very, very careful when it came to doubt. As a matter of fact, for example, Bernardino Tomitano, when he writes his sort of apology for having translated Erasmus' version of the Gospels of Matthew, prints to sort of self-apologies, and in one of them, he says it was Erasmus. He led me to doubt, for Erasmus is always doubting, and he pushed me to doubt. That is 1556, more or less. So in a way, he knew that doubting was wrong, and he was trying to project the fault on Erasmus. And going back to literature, one of the things, and this probably also answers to Lee's question, I was intrigued by doubt in this particular time, because doubt in this time is a very fluid notion. So in the second half of the century, it becomes very recognizable. So on the one hand, you have the great skeptical philosophers, Bruno, Vanini, Montaigne, and the canon of. On the other hand, you have the explosion of probabilism that brings doubt at the center of the Counter-Reformation Church. Stefania Tutino has recently written a couple of books on this. And then you have the new people, right? For example, the Jesuits have to deal with the doubts of the. There are beautiful letters by Francis Xavier in which describes the doubts of the Japanese and how sorry, am I still here? Okay, because I got a message leave meeting, but okay. So it all changes. But
you were doubting.
I'm sure myself. And well, yeah, but I couldn't find it. I haven't looked systematically, but I guess that this kind of freedom that I find in the first part of the century is no longer there in the second half of the century. Probably people are writing sonnets on doubt, or novellas on doubt. You don't find them. There are probably more oblique ways, or you have the great thinkers. But that's another story. I wanted to move away from that narrative of, the great peaks of skepticism or incredulity.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Tanara.
Other questions or comments or doubts?
Can I just enter in?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I put in the chat that I had a question, but
sorry, yeah.
No, it's okay. I didn't know the procedure. Thank you, Marco, for your talk. So of course, being an art historian, I have to, mention, of course, I understand why you chose Caravaggio for the opening image because of Doubting Thomas. But now that we're really getting into the change in doubt over time, I have to ask, because you brought up Michelangelo and a few other artists, if you could choose an image, not from after 1600 when everything is different, but something from earlier, whether it's, you mentioned Michelangelo, and you started using very artisanal language, like doubt as a tool, doubt as a chisel. And of course, for Michelangelo, doubt famously led to a kind of infinito in his work, but also even a kind of annihilation, right? Late in his sculpture. And so I was wondering if seems like you've reflected quite a bit on sort of doubting vision and how to interact with not just visual games, but artworks as well. And so I was wondering if I asked you to change the opening image from the talk to something actually in the period that you're studying, what you might put in its place.
Thank you, Cinda. Good to see you anyway. No, that's a really good question, because I'm actually looking for a cover for my book. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to. Yeah. That's a great question, actually. So I have a chapter on I call it the iconology of doubt. It's not really probably what an art historian would call it, but anyway, there are stories of doubt. The doubting Thomas is one, for example. The doubt of Joseph is another, although less straightforward. There is the story of the doubting midwife, which has a lot of, from the Middle Ages, a lot of success in a way. These are stories that were probably familiar to people. They were displayed in public spaces, not just churches, but also tribunals. The doubting Thomas in Florence, for example. They sometimes were accompanied by texts. I haven't found really much about, visualizing doubt before Ripa. And Ripa visualizes doubt as a young man, walks in the dark because he's young, he's unexperienced, he's holding a stick, a lantern, because the stick is experience, the lantern is reason, and Michelangelo talks about doubt in a poem, a sort of fragment known as Ottave dei Giganti, in which he talks about these giants. It's a very kind of enigmatic text and unaccomplished one, in which it talks of doubt as a man who goes leaping around, and he just walks around at night, and it's a sort of outlaw. It depicts why and doubt. So yes, these allegories or personifications as outlaws. So why, for example, carries weapons, as does doubt, and it carries keys to force locks. So probably the idea is again that of violating some boundaries set to human understanding. Daniele Barbaro, whom I mentioned before, in one of his sonnets of doubt, the last one actually, says that if doubt were represented, it shouldn't have a face or hands or feet or a shape, because doubt is all the time the sort of conflation of opposite ideas. So it can actually be represented. Going back to and this probably leads in that same direction of annihilation that you mentioned about probably Michelangelo. Maybe not, I don't know, just a thought. But so to answer your question, I have no idea. But probably, you're right, or either Michelangelo or Leonardo, probably some of Leonardo, something of Leonardo, I don't know what. Probably looking at some of his catastrophes or something like that. That could probably be a nice way of showing this. But I don't actually know. I have never found an allegory of doubt or an image of doubt other than those I mentioned.
Leonardo has this wonderful two-sided drawing of now it's referred to as 5 gypsies, but it was previously known as 5 grotesque heads in the Royal Collection. And it's got the 5 different versions of madness. It's also referred to sometimes. And on the back, he has a little poem about doubting your friends, doubting what you see. Those who appear to be your friends are probably the ones who are your enemies. It's this very... And then on the front, you have these very deceptive looking people that are actually committing, they're actually robbing and reading palms at the same time, like stealing his purse while reading his palm. And he's a kind of Caesar type. He has an oak crown, the one being stolen from, having his palm read, which is maybe a reference to kind of poking fun at antiquarian and kind of people who inflate themselves through this kind of classicizing knowledge or whatever, because they can't even see what's in front of their eyes.
Right.
Which is
that sounds very
stealing from them. So I think Leonardo is a very good idea for someone who's playing with making you not trust what you see,
Thank you. Oh, just if I can add, wow, thank you. This is great. I didn't know. Can you maybe send me a reference? Thanks.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The idea of not trusting what you see, probably it's interesting that this same Daniele Barbaro is so interested in doubt, then he translates Vitruvius, but also he has, this treatise on perspective, in which he's probably the first who writes about anamorphosis, so about deceptive images. So that could also be a nice way of visualizing a paradox of doubt, these two ways of looking at the same things. So probably,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So doubt might have a face, but not on just one level, just kind of multiple levels and deceiving kind of image for doubt. That's very interesting. Thank you. Anybody else before we close the session?
I've got one more, if I can.
Please, sure.
So this morning I was looking at Viccellio's book of costumes, the Turks, obviously. And I was wondering whether people, well, they're like these images that probably got reproduced millions of times in different countries, etc. Do people actually believe that a Turk or whichever person from whichever nation looked like that? Or, I mean, does the doubt that you're speaking of, how to say it, is it like a philosophical doubt, or when we're talking about fake news, etc., do people doubt these facts as well,
No, yeah, no, that's right. I don't know. I guess it's more like a form of doubt that existed. And in fact, some others played into this. For example, Anton Francesco Doni at some point says, if I were a king, I had letters printed, fake letters coming from Turkey, saying that, they're doing this and that in order to cause a certain reaction in my people. So, yeah, in general, what I'm trying to do is, I guess that most of my people don't have really a knowledge of philosophical doubt. They're more like perplexed, puzzled, and about a lot of things. And the Turks, for example, are part of this narrative in a way. I don't know, because they are so mysterious, but also because they are a threat that is always there, So, and because there's so much curiosity about that, but I don't know. Or maybe we can talk about this if you like.
Thank you. I was particularly struck and amazed, but also I also enjoyed somehow the picture of the doubt as a violation. It's like an act of hubris, which is kind of counter common opinion, because usually you say, oh, okay, if you act with hubris, you actually push your knowledge, in a kind of positive way. But doubting looks more like retrieving, to go back. But in your image, in your talk, doubting is more very much acting and violating and penetrating the secret of nature, and that's to me that's new and something that okay, if you think of skepticism, of course you might have, but in a more joyful way in the literature that you are analyzing. It's a kind of paradoxical act, but it is very interesting. I'm referring specifically to the image of the old man trying to violate the secret of nature, so to speak. Yeah.
No, I guess that's absolutely right. You know, when Dante in the Paradiso and the Canto 4, you know, describes doubt, you know, as a sort of tree from which all these branches, sprout. And he says, well, if God didn't want us to know, he wouldn't have let us doubt. You know, doubt is good. Doubt is positive. That means we can push further our knowledge, and God wants, because otherwise, you know, we wouldn't have doubts. And I guess this remains, in a way, this positive view of doubt. For example, in some of these sonnets by Daniele Barbara, you know, it says doubt is good, you know, it leads to the rejuvenation of knowledge. But then he says, well, but then if you push it too far, doubt, you know, you get melancholic, you get stuck, you know, you are totally unable of making a decision, and that's too much. And I guess this has to do with what was going on from the, you know, in the religious field in those years. So these people are more or less shared, I have to say, spiritual ideas, more or less, to some extent. So you find it a lot, this idea that you should set a limit to knowledge. You find it in Michelangelo, maybe in different ways, but you find it in Michelangelo. Even in Piccolomini, in the preface to his this first part, the second part of natural philosophy, in the introduction, he talks about the greedy, doubtful, ingorde dubitazioni, you know, those who push knowledge too far and say, science is good, correct me if I'm wrong, this is your field, but, you know, but up to a certain point, you know, so there is this sense that doubt is good only, you know, to a certain point, then it becomes too much. It's probably traditional ideas, but in these decades, it's really widespread.
So until a certain point, looks like doubt is a very good tool against the tyranny of just one way of knowing, just one scheme, knowledge scheme. It looks to me like you know, it's like an antidote somehow.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
Even in the joyful way of gaming, or not just in the way of serious kind of Montaigne philosophy, but also more in a joyful way.
Yeah, there is this idea that doubt is good in that it kind of protects you, you know, from being too much into things, whatever things are, reality or
so it's a practice of distance, also of perspectivism.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a practice of distance and perspectivism.
Yeah, I guess. I guess probably it would be nice to explore the connections between the way in which in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, you know, the so-called discernment of spirits, you know, when you had this extraordinary religious experience, always all these spiritual counselors, advisors suggested to especially women, but also men, you know, don't believe what you see, you know, the more you believe, the more you doubt, the more you believe, meaning that you are less exposed to the risk of, you know, believing that in the tricks of the devil, are falling into these tricks. So doubt is good because it preserves you in a way from the assault of the devil or the Inquisition, maybe later. But yeah.
Thank you, Marco. Any other very final questions? Actually, one question at the maximum. Okay. Thank you very much, Marco. That was great, but very nice exercise also of discussing. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this. You're very welcome, and that's the good thing of Zoom is that even people. Cristina, sorry, are you connecting from Canada or no?
Yeah, outside Montreal.
Perfect. You see, okay.
From Marco's other identity as a scholar in Canada.
So thank you very much, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you, Tada. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.